Hello and welcome to today's Range 4 webcast. Today we're talking about DevOps goals and rewards. My name's Helen Beale and I'm the head of DevOps here at Range 4. We're assuming a certain level of knowledge about the DevOps movement here on this webcast today, but we'll do a little bit of scene setting before we start. This is one of my favourite quotes about DevOps from Jesse Robbins, and in just 6 words it sums up what DevOps is all about. We're kind of in a perfect storm in IT at the moment, where on the one hand we have IT being more strategic and mission critical to organisations and enterprises than ever before. What people do with their web applications in particular and their social and mobile interactions can really make the difference between a company that thrives and a company that gets left behind. So businesses are putting an increasing amount of pressure onto their IT development teams to deliver innovation to market. On the other side of this perfect storm, we have the operations people within organisations who have spent often decades building their system infrastructures that have become increasingly more sophisticated and complicated over the time that they've been built, including things like systems or service-oriented architectures, many integrations to third-party ecosystem applications. And these systems, as consequently, have become quite fragile. So what we have is a conflict between the developers who are trying to push innovation and change through into these quite fragile systems that the IT operations people are often rewarded for and are certainly very concerned about keeping up and keeping stable. They don't want to see any outages, they don't want to see any risk of causing outages, and unfortunately change often means that. So what we've ended up with is an environment, and this slide is from another DevOps guru, Gene Kim. What we've ended up with is an environment where we have 2 conflicting areas in IT. So there's a lot of words on this slide, but we can focus on things like fragile, that we've already talked about, turbulent, lengthening cycles, difficult to diagnose, things that are failing, less time to fix, increasing backlogs, increasing tension, more failure, too much time, too much firefighting. So we've got a lot of symptoms of this cause, and the cause being the conflict between these 2 environments. So we know what the problem is that we're trying to fix, and we know or have an idea of the utopic vision that we're trying to create. So what does a DevOps culture look like? Well, here are some ideas of where we want to get to. We want to get to an environment where innovation moves from development into production in a frictionless manner, where if something goes wrong, people aren't blamed for it, but everyone is trusting that they're on the same team and they're working together to get that system back up and running or get that thing back out to the people that need to consume it. We're looking for transparency between these traditionally siloed parts of the IT enterprise. We're looking for transparency to management and to the business requirements coming through. And ultimately, a DevOps culture should be more than successful, more than surviving, it should be thriving. So some more wise words from Jesse Robbins on how to change culture. And change is always really hard, and changing culture is particularly hard. Enterprises have a lot of history and a lot of habits that they need to break or certainly evolve to take advantage of these new utopic ideas around not blaming people, not punishing people for failure, getting everyone to collaborate transparently and effectively. So Jesse has some words here, and they're great words and they're great ideas. They do raise a few more questions themselves. So what are these metrics that Jesse speaks of? What does success look like, and what are these compelling events? So one of the first things we're asked by people that we work with that are starting to try and understand what DevOps is and how they can embrace it to create this better world for themselves is, where do we start? It's what people want to know. And our reply is always the same. Start by trying to baseline where you are today. Start by looking at the metrics that define your current position. And there are a number of quite trackable, fairly identifiable metrics that we recommend people look at when they're considering DevOps. So they're things like the volume and frequency of defects. So how often is that defect coming down the line? And importantly, how often on average is it taking you to fix a defect? And how much the associated resource costs and time associated with that. Similarly, how often and frequently are you performing releases? How long does every release take? Again, what's the cost or the elapsed time to release? What's the cost of the resource associated with that release? And then we also look at mean time to repair or mean time to resolution. So if you do have an outage, and how often do they happen and how long do they last? Again, what's the cost associated with that? So we have an idea of what we're trying to get away from. We have an idea of where we're trying to get to. We know now some idea of how we can measure some metrics around where you are today. What do you do when you've done that? Well, the next thing we recommend you do is think about, again, that desired future state, so that utopic vision. So you should have a high-level business idea of where you might want to be in 3 or 5 years. And you should be able to perhaps associate that with a more collaborative, a more sharing-based culture. And it's important to note here, perhaps, that although it's quite difficult to put a value on improving a cultural environment, we do know that happier people are more productive people, and it's certainly not impossible to measure where you are today with the cultural metrics, such as things like blame and failure, and how you're cross-skilling around teams, and how your people feel that ideas are received and acted upon. And it's certainly possible to keep on measuring that. Excuse me. And that's the important thing about metrics, is once you baseline, you need to keep on checking them. You need to check them to be able to recognise and report on success. You need to check them to recognise and report on failure and tweak your strategies accordingly. With DevOps, if you're going to be really successful with it, having a grassroots movement without buy-in from senior stakeholders and budget holders is probably not going to work. So from day one, you need to have stakeholders in HR. You certainly need to have stakeholders in finance, and your finance people, more and more, and quite rightly so, are going to care about the return on investment. And if you want to build a business case, you will need some solid metrics to be able to do that. And if you want to do a follow-on project, you'll need to report on the success of your first project and your second project. So the baseline and the vision of your desired future state are really important. Once you've got that vision and your stakeholders have bought into where you're trying to go, then it's time to workshop about where your first bottlenecks might be and what initiatives you can bring into play to try and eliminate those bottlenecks. So people in the DevOps world, we talk a lot about a book by Gene Kim, who we already saw a slide from Gene, called The Phoenix Project. He wrote it with Kevin Behrens, George Spafford, and it's a fiction, so it's a novel about DevOps. One of the concepts within it is the concept of flow and the theory of constraints, and the idea that any improvement not made at a constraint is actually an illusion. And the concept behind that is you can remove what looks like a bottleneck, but if it's not really, and the bottleneck's coming up, all you're going to do is move work faster to that bottleneck, so you're going to end up with a backlog of work. If you remove it on the other side of the bottleneck, you'll end up with effectively a vacuum of work. So when you're thinking about establishing your roadmap and thinking about the kind of projects you need to do, try and do some work to identify where those immediate bottlenecks are, and then try and prioritise them, try and figure out, which ones come next. Once you've got your initiatives and your imperatives thought out, you can start putting together a number of work streams, and they don't have to be sequential, they can run in parallel. They'll probably start more around the cultural area. So having worked with software development life cycles for quite some time now, we always used to preach the mantra, people, process, tools. We've updated that slightly in the DevOps world, and now we talk about culture, interactions, and automation. But it's very important that you start with getting your culture right, then start looking at those interactions and how to streamline the processes around the interactions that you have in your business. And then finally, to fully optimize your streamlined process, you can implement automation. But your automation is unlikely to work if you haven't done those few steps first. You'll see on this slide there is a big work kind of endpoint around continuous delivery. That is a lot of people, but not everybody's purpose around doing DevOps. So here's a real-world example of a customer we've worked with, where we've tried to baseline where they are now and looked at with them where they want to be. So you can see that they currently have an 8-week test cycle, and they want to reduce that to 3 weeks. Their release cycle is 8 months, and they want that to be quarterly. Then you'll see, and you may remember earlier that I did kind of qualify this, that these are fairly easy metrics to identify, that they've got quite a vague number there of high number of defects, and then they want to see a reduction in the number of defects. Now, of course, to be able to measure that properly, we'll need to do some more work with this customer to understand exactly what volume of defects we're talking about here. And this is where life becomes a little bit more complicated, because that number isn't always the same from hour to hour, from day to day, from week to week, and it certainly isn't the same from application to application. So there's a reasonable amount of work to be done here with organisations or within your organisation to understand what these metrics look like and what's reasonable about moving forward. So now we have an idea of where we are and what we don't like about it, where we want to be. We have an idea of the baseline metrics we can take and the kind of process we can go through to build out a DevOps project. So now let's start thinking about what success might look like. This is a DevOps maturity model that we use to discuss with our customers about where they might want to try and get to. So at number 4, you can see we're at managed DevOps. So this is pretty mature on a scale. This is where people have an environment, for example, where they can deploy application releases on demand. They can identify preemptively whether there's going to be a problem with that release in production, whether there's going to whether a performance issue is indicating there's going to be an outage, whether they're seeing certain performance issues in certain areas of the code or business transactions, and they can preempt that failure. They can instantly redeploy the last known working version and push that problematic version back into development, where they get a lot of intelligence to know where the problem is in the code. They can very quickly fix it, push it back into an automated testing program, and when that's got through the route to live successfully, it can be automatically redeployed. But lots of people are in different places on this maturity index, so there's lots of measurements we can do as people work up through the maturity model. So we've established some metrics around that. So we've talked about, deployment on demand, or increasing the frequency of deployments, or reducing the number of defects, or reducing the time taken to fix the defect. So sure, you're all familiar with SMART goals, and I apologise if the words underneath the acronym aren't the ones that you are completely familiar with. There are quite a few variations in the marketplace. But let's have a little think about setting SMART goals around DevOps ambitions. So here is an example of a DevOps SMART goal. Our team will release updates to the core business application, Milton, once a day by the 1st of September 2014. We currently perform releases once a fortnight, but believe, using automation, this goal is attainable. Not only will it allow us to put revenue-generating innovation to market faster, the process will be more consistent and reliable. So we know where we're starting from, we know where we're aiming for, we know who's going to do it and how long it's intended to take. We think it's achievable, and we know why we're doing it. Here's another example of DevOps SMART goal. We, the testing team, will reduce the volume of defects from 20 to 2 per week by the end of 2014, and through improved testing techniques, reduce the average time to fix a defect from 4 hours to 30 minutes in the same time frame, thus removing backlog and pushing software improvements to market at greater velocity. We like using this SMART goal a lot to discuss with our customers, because there's some flaws in here, and the main flaw is that we're asking the testing team to reduce the volume of defects. Now, the testing team, of course, aren't responsible for the creation or identification of defects, only the fixing of them. So this is just a little warning to be cognizant and careful when you're creating the SMART goals, to make sure that they do work, they are involving the right people, and they are achievable, and they're not going to drive the wrong behaviours, like, for example, hiding defects in order to be able to be seen at reaching that goal and therefore achieving success. So now we have an idea of the kind of metrics we might want to measure and how to set the right goals around them and how to see success. So the next question then is, in a DevOps environment, how do we best celebrate success? I had a friend once say to me that you work to live, you don't live to work. And I disagreed with her at the time, and I still disagree with her. I think the delineation for me between work and play is quite blurred. I don't consider work separate from my life. Work is a very big part of my life, and I work full time, which most people do, I think, probably on the webcast, and that's a good 8 hours plus of 5 days a week. That's a large part of our life. So I think it's very sad if people don't enjoy their work. I think it's a real shame, and I think I would feel that I was wasting part of my life if I didn't gain pleasure from it. and Steve Jobs agrees. So, how do we achieve joy at work? We do live in the Western world in an incredibly privileged position. We're born in a place where we can find jobs that we find challenging, that we find meaningful, that we find really rewarding. But I don't think for any of us that isn't something that we shouldn't look for at work. We should find our work something that has occasional, if not frequent, joy associated with it. So this is from the Puppet Labs 2014 State of DevOps report. I said earlier that it's really difficult to put a cultural improvement number in a business case. So it's really difficult to say, okay, so we improved the people's feelings about blame 10% from March to September, and therefore we think that's worth a 5% increase in revenues. It's impossible to make those sort of correlations. However, as the DevOps report identifies, job satisfaction is the number one predictor of organisational performance. So getting to a place where you all feel that your work is challenging, meaningful and rewarding, and that contributions are recognised and you can see their influence, can have a huge impact on your overall company's performance. So I ask on Twitter quite regularly how people want to be recognised for success and DevOps success. And here's one response from Jonathan. So he suggested that he would like to see a cash reward or some time off or a voice or a seat at a higher table. I asked him if the time off would be over and above the standard allowance. A lot of people in IT that are in these environments where there's a lot of pressure, where they're having to do a lot of unplanned work, are actually finding it quite tough to even take their assigned allowance of time off. He said absolutely above, and I started to float some ideas with him that are coming from the west coast of America, from the San Francisco Bay Area, companies that are offering organisational or their employees unlimited amounts of time off, with the theory that they will be so happy and so engaged at work that they'll want to take some time off because we all need a break, but they won't be taking the mickey. They will be taking a sort of average amount of time off, but it will be perceived as a great benefit. He doesn't particularly believe that would work, because he thinks that we need to be completely altruistic. And I think that's a great debate for another time, but it's not really what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about today is how to reward people specifically on their DevOps achieved goals and the success that they achieve whilst delivering these metrics that we've identified. So this is an acronym from a book called The Brain at Work by a guy called David Rock, who is a neuroscientist. I've been quite interested in neuroscience for quite a while. There is some brain circuitry that is common to several drivers around kind of the core things that we need to live. So food and shelter and staying alive. Love also uses a similar brain circuit. And David has identified these 5 areas of primary social motivational drivers that also use the same brain circuit, which is a threat and reward circuit. So if somebody threatens your status at work, you will have the same physiological response as you would have if someone threatened your life. And in the same way, you will have the same reward circuitry, so the same dopamine responses and oxytocin responses when you are made happy in life, as you will with these motivational drivers. So what are the SCARF motivational drivers? Well, S is for status. We have a lot of debate about this with people, because some people kind of feel that is having a sense of superiority over others, but I think it's much more intrinsic than that. So it's having a sense that you've achieved your social status that you are comfortable with, that makes you feel good about yourself. So one of our delivery consultants in particular, he thinks he's primarily motivated by this one, and he says that he really sees himself as a polished professional, and if someone he feels is making a comment or a jibe that perhaps he isn't being 100% professional, or perhaps doesn't know his subject or have full mastery of his subject, he finds that really offensive. C is for certainty. So this is the people that are really motivated by security, knowing what's going to happen in the future, being able to be comfortable in what they're doing today, knowing that their job isn't on the edge and their company isn't in turmoil. Autonomy is about being able to see the output of the work that you do. So feeling that you have some control, so your contribution has a visible and tangible result on what happens next, hopefully in a positive way. R is for relatedness. So these are the people that like to feel that the people they work with are people like them. So a sense of family at work, a sense of commonality, certainly that they trust the people that are around them and feel that they're working towards a common goal. And F is for fairness. So the idea that the organisation that they work with is egalitarian, it's equitable, that everyone is treated in the same manner, and that there is openness and transparency at work. So once we understand these motivational drivers, we can then go on to start thinking about the kind of rewards that we can apply to people. So there's basically two broad sections of rewards. There's intrinsic or internal rewards and extrinsic or external rewards. So the intrinsic rewards are the ones that we feel inside ourselves, so the ones associated with the dopamine and oxytocin rushes that we have in the brain and the reward system. So the senses of pride and mastery and autonomy, the joy that we've spoken about, the feeling that something is actually being achieved. And for people, the opportunity to be altruistic and give to others, and the feeling that we are good at what we do and we're appreciated for our contribution. Extrinsic rewards, interestingly, will mostly trigger intrinsic rewards, but they're easier to give in some respects because they're physical. So it's easier to offer somebody a £100 bonus than a sense of pride. It's easier to offer gift cards and vouchers and time off, or the opportunity to play, whether that's take the afternoon off and go home to your families, or take the afternoon off and all of you go and have a beer in the pub or a walk in the park, whatever it is. Offering people more flexibility about what they do at work. Praise and thanks and compliments are probably the simplest extrinsic rewards and the ones that are most likely to create the immediate senses of kind of pride and joy. So there's lots of things that we can do, but let's think about how we can perhaps align motivations with rewards. So people that are more interested in status are more likely to be rewarded or enjoy being rewarded by these kind of extrinsic cash type awards or actual awards themselves. So, trophies of some sort, prizes, Achievers Club, the 100% Club, being given a promotion to management or a team leader type role. People that are more involved with certainty are more likely to be more interested in improving their general level of mastery, and therefore their kind of the way that they are needed in work and their value at work. So giving them the opportunity to get more qualifications, or changing their contract to extend notice periods, things like that, or giving them the ability to have access to project stakeholders or leadership team meetings is going to be really important to them, or giving them ownership of a new project. People that like autonomy are also likely to like leadership, being given opportunities to have their own ideas acted upon, and being given opportunity to showcase their success in some way. So writing and delivering case studies, talking to teams about projects that they've done and how well they worked. People that are really into relatedness, however, are likely to like doing things with other people on an equal basis. So we call this team-based play. So going on laser quest, or going on pedalos on a lake for the afternoon, or doing a group visit to some kind of team bonding session would be really important to these guys. And the people that are particularly motivated by relatedness are going to be particularly rewarded by oxytocin. So oxytocin is the brain chemical that is released when we bond or attach with other human beings. So they're going to particularly like this sort of thing. They're going to like things like mentoring as well, so being able to get closer and buddy up with people and share knowledge with them, whether they're receiving it or they feel they're giving it. They're going to like that both ways. People that are primarily concerned with fairness at work, though, are going to be not very motivated by things like cash. In fact, they'll probably be, or possibly be, quite turned off by things like that. But if you offer them things like, and there's an Australian company, Atlassian, also in San Francisco, who make gyro and bamboo and things like that, who have things in their employee program like they can take up to 5 days off work a year to go and do voluntary work in the community. And that's a very popular thing to offer. and really particularly focusing on these people that are interested in fairness. And the fact that I've dwelt in particular on these kind of last two, and the oxytocin element of what relatedness people like, and the fact that people interested in fairness are going to not be so keen on the kind of cash and those type of external rewards, is a really important point, because when we're trying to create goals and trying to create success within a DevOps environment, the goals are going to be shared across a team, and the success is going to be shared across a team. But a team is made of individuals, and the individuals are all going to respond to different reward types. So we have to be really inventive when we're doing this and thinking of how to address all of these different types of motivation. So let's just go back a couple of steps and remind ourselves about what this DevOps culture looked like. And eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that there are three pale green speech bubbles here, and the three pale green speech bubbles that I didn't mention when I was covering the slide before. And these particular adjectives come from, again, Atlassian that I was just talking about from the voluntary work perspective. And they have a video on their website with their employees, and these are actual words from their employees' mouths about why they enjoy working at Atlassian. Now, when you saw this slide to begin with, some of you may have thought it was a bit hippy-dippy, or you couldn't ever imagine your enterprise organisation getting to a point where it felt casual or comfortable or like home and family. But hopefully now that we've had a closer look at humans' primary social motivations, you'll understand or have a more appreciation for why actually for some people these are really key things to aim for. And we've been really surprised with the enterprises that we work for, with people's enthusiasm to try and change cultures to identify these things and their belief that they can do this. So motivations, again, two broad camps that drivers and rewards-based behaviours, or ways that we can deliver rewards, again, split into two broad camps, the carrots and the sticks. The sticks, of course, are not very DevOps. These are the punishment, the kind of creation of an environment of fear, of failure that we're trying to get away from in DevOps. So we're really just looking at what carrots we can work with. So this is from Daniel Pink, who is an ex-advisor to Al Gore's book Drive, and he's done a lot of work, and there's a TED talk with him which summarises this really nicely, and I know this is a very wordy flowchart for a shortish presentation. But what Daniel's really saying here, in essence, is that there are some jobs or tasks that are very repetitive and very manual that it really works to give an external bonus or reward for. So if somebody's doing something like folding 100 boxes an hour, and you say if you can fold 110 boxes an hour, we'll give you another $10 an hour, that's the kind of thing that really can focus someone's mind in the right way and get them doing that task. If the goal itself, though, is a little bit more complicated and the path there is a little bit more sophisticated and requires more creative thinking and will take more time and more pieces and more people to be involved to get there, giving an extrinsic reward could drive the wrong behaviour. So, for example, you could say, right, we want to go from 1 release a week to 2 releases a week, and someone might find a way of writing a couple of scripts that do that quite quickly. And then you'll say, well, let's go from 2 releases a week to 5 releases a week, and you'll write more scripts. And you know in your heart of hearts that you want to get to on-demand releases. But if you started with the on-demand release goal and not given such short-term rewards that had focused the mind so much, people might have sat back and kind of said, well, what we really need to do is a sequence of events, and we need to look at the overall requirements that we have and the overall tools that we have, and do an evaluation of what's available in the market, and do a long, slow implementation of this tooling, rather than write a ton of scripts and end up with a monster. So we have to be very careful when we're thinking about these type of goals. And Daniel's real point is that don't always immediately think that offering someone an external reward is going to have the thing that you need. What you actually need to focus on is building an environment that fosters autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And this is a real strong DevOps concept, is the greatest reward is working in an environment that gives you joy in your work. So this is Charles Goodhart. Charles was an advisor to the Bank of England, and he said, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So again, this is a big warning. There'll be dragons there. The measure, reduce defects by a certain number. If you make that a target, it may no longer be a good measure because it might be creating the wrong behaviours. So we have to balance all of this out as we're writing our business cases, setting our goals, and thinking about how we want to reward on those goals and how we measure against those targets. And this is Dilbert that I particularly enjoy, which I think summarises another angle on this, that what Dilbert's saying here is that we can miss goals because of poor management, and management could set the wrong goals in the first place. And then as a result of that, we could actually be rewarding in the wrong way. So there's a lot of places to trip up here, unfortunately. But in summary, what we need to do is we need to create autonomy and mastery and an environment where people feel that they have purpose. Bob Marshall, who is another great speaker around flow and the whole concepts around Kanban and lean and the principles about being more agile at work, talks about the Antimatter Principle. So again, how to create these environments where people feel they can contribute and find joy in the act of working together with similar people. So he has a number of design principles that he talks about. Attending to what people need to do, doing what's needed, evolving the service, making things optional. So don't make everybody feel like they're being told what to do all the time. Creating flow, so creating the ability to take work from one end of the process to the other, and including people. So there's lots of things we can talk about and consider here, and how to change behaviours and initiatives to undertake to do these, and how to involve the stakeholders that are required to make this work. But there is no silver bullet. The stuff is quite complicated. So the first thing you need to do is understand where you are, who you are, know where you want to be. What is that vision that you have for your organisation and your culture? You need to plan and prioritise your work streams. Try things, change things, and try changing things. Change is hard. You need to measure the whole way through. So some of you may know about DevOps Friday 5. It's an initiative that we have at Range 4. Every Friday we ask a person to answer 5 questions around DevOps, and we publish it on our blogs and through social media. The second question on the 5-question list is, when people do DevOps, what's the most common mistake you see them make? And this is kind of going back to step 5 that we just covered. Try things and change things. Alan Schimmel, who's the editor-in-chief of DevOps.com magazine, this was his response to that question. And he said, people spend too much time railing against why that's DevOps won't work instead of making it work. And this is the key thing. You have to, retain your optimism, but retain your pragmatism, but don't get bogged down in kind of thinking, well, we're just this way and it's never going to work. So if you want some help with DevOps, you know where we are at Range 4. We'll leave you with this thought: be DevOps-tastic.